Yeah, so on the supply chain side, one of the few things I've seen that have caused friction to be able to adopt blockchain is the ability to actually produce data, especially like your example with the cocoa is the farmer is not really producing that much data. How do you collect that data? And the second issue I've seen is that, okay, as you start to do manufacturing processes, you have multiple sources, they come together in some aggregated function, and how do you actually trace the source once when you have them producing a chocolate bar, for example, you have 50 different things, which one was the right source because it's a continuous manufacturing process.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'll take the second part, and then about the example I like to use is making bread. You've got grain that goes into flour plants, and you have multiple farms feeding the flour plant, and then when you go to make the bread, mix it, there's multiple flour plants feeding a bread making facility. This situation, versus the Walmart example where it's a box of mangoes, they don't change, you just track the box of mangoes. You've got processing going on. There needs to be modification in the MES application in each one of those processing plants. And you may even have to change the control system so you know which silo the grain is coming from, and you know what farm that grain came from. And there's got to be some practices that you only put one farm's grain in a particular silo. And then the MES application would know when you switched over to another silo, and that becomes a blockchain transaction. And it's similar when you're taking the flour and making bread. Again, you got silos, when you switch from one silo to another. So this does, when you're doing processing versus just pure supply chain, it does take some modification and investment in the MES application and maybe even the control system to track the goods. And the finer the tracking, obviously, the better. There is some activity, I know, and I've talked to some folks in Europe who are doing this. And if you want to ask me who and how, I'll be delighted to have a conversation with you about it. And what was the first part of the question again?
It's about the farmers. How do you collect data from like the farmers that are typically not producing data about that sort of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. That's a problem you'll have in almost every single supply chain, which is the level of ability to adopt and adopt technology by different stakeholders. The small farmers do not have the capacity. So one, in the example that I was quoting there, the initiative did not start because of blockchain. I think the problem, or rather trying to capture some information from the farmer, has been there for a long time. And interestingly, more people have mobile phones than perhaps any other time in the world now, right? So the way you would simplify the solution is that you would have a small application, perhaps not like the Iowa application, but some application which would allow a farmer to enter the information, and that's how it is designed. But more importantly, right, I think one of the key points that I want to make is that blockchain is not necessarily an independent, isolated technology that can solve all problems in the supply chains. Supply chains existed for thousands of years, right? As long as trade is there, supply chains have been there. It is not about, suddenly blockchain technology can solve all problems. One, it is actually at the combination of, as Ralph was mentioning, control systems, IoT, and other sensor data, along with inputs coming from various sources that make up for more information to be uploaded to the chain. But secondly, what blockchain can do is make people accountable. Right? There will always be the question of, whoever is entering the data for the first time on the first mile, what if they say that, this bag of cocoa is grade 95 instead of grade 80 or something like that, right? Yes, they can do that. They can do that even with the blockchain solution. Nothing is preventing human behavior, right? Immediately. But what is very, very impactful with this technology is that whatever you say, you cannot go back and change that. Because I've codified that, I've taken a thumbprint of that, put it on the chain, Simba chain has it, somebody else has it. I don't need to look at every single bit and byte of data in time 20 years into the past to figure out that you're lying. I just need to look at one small 64-character length string to see whether you're saying something that you did not say last time. It could just be as simple as, answering a question in all caps versus, lowercase or whatever. The key is that you bring the accountability, which over time will change the behavior. That farmer who's corrupting the data, yeah, he or she can continue to do that. The certifier who's actually certifying that every time this gentleman says that, this is highest grade coffee or highest grade cocoa, I'm certifying that that is the case, that's fine. You can continue to do that. Somewhere down the road, 2 years, 3 years, whatever time period down the road, there'll be a complaint. The end chocolate manufacturer will be able to trace back and say that, these are the two bad actors. Always, why is it that always these two guys? Let me see what else they have been doing. You can just pinpoint them, and then you can kick them out of the system. That's how, and that's what Ralph was mentioning with his blockchain example. Right? Hope that helps.
Another question?
Mark, you always ask questions that get us to squirm, with beads of sweat come off our foreheads.
Sure. Anyone envision plant floor applications, or as it touches automation or controls or MES? I mean, you talked about how things might have to change as it reaches down into the plant floor to make sure that tracking is legitimate through each layer.
So let me start. Remember, all the applications basically are frenemies cooperating. So if all the entities are part of one organization, one company, they're not frenemies anymore. They're part of one organization. There really is, to my knowledge, no need for blockchain. And the only example I know of when it starts to affect control systems and MES is when they need to transact data into from a processing plant to identify clearly where for example, a bread example, where the grain came from and where the flour is going to. That is a significant investment. There are people who are piloting that I know of. But I don't know of any production applications yet. Did that answer your question, Mark?
And so what this is replacing is a third-party auditor that might not be able to do the kind of instantaneous tracking that could speed up the system?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
you think about most manufacturers have to get ISO audit, right? So you have your ISO 9001, 2015 standard ISO audit. Aerospace is AS 9100. Automotive has a TS standard. So when you're looking at that, those audits can become a lot more easier. Layered process audits that are happening within your own organization can be a lot easier because you can immediately query that data and find that out. And I think that answers some of the MES. You got serialization type processes. So like aerospace is very much, everything has a serial number. But if you have a process kind of application like making bread, it's more of that batch. So you have batch or lot.
Yeah.
So you're taking it that way. So but it still can be applied into the blockchain space. It's just more about nuances of how that business process works. But yeah.
And what might some of the benchmarking applications be when frenemies are sharing data?
So pharmaceutical. So we have a couple pharmaceutical customers in the process where there are multiple ones in the supply chain are building one drug and they have to share data, and so it's FDA's like, I mean, they're on them, and you got to make sure everything is, all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and so that's one there. But yeah, anything that's we kind of like call it any highly regulated or consequence kind of manufacturing can be aerospace. Obviously, things can fall out of the sky. Anything like that is very much ripe for having these audit trails, which blockchain provides.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Exactly. So we very much care about that.
Last chance, anybody? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you learned a little bit about blockchain, and now you probably feel a little better about your food safety, too. Thank you.